All right. If you are tired, you can totally fall asleep, or you can fake sleep. It doesn't really matter. You can also get up, walk around. I do that at work meetings. Or I did when I didn't work remote. I just get up and I just walk and stand in the back of the room. Or if you do fall asleep, I'm gonna, instead of being mean and throwing something or dropping a book in front of your face, I'm just gonna start teaching in the voice of Mickey Mouse and see if it gets you back. And it's not a very good Mickey Mouse, so it usually works. Oh boy! All right. That's right in between, that's right. Chinchilla rat sounds exactly like that. All right. Okay. Here we go. I'm going to just repeat myself the whole time so this sticks. And I'd rather you be slightly annoyed than forgetful. So, we came off of here, rebellion, nothing good happened. Bad, 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 bad. Only Noah's even worth mentioning. Waters of chaos, wipe everything away. Start all over on top of a mountain in a garden with a new family, with a new promise to be fruitful and multiply. Instead of God walking in their midst, there's a going up offering that ascends to God in his heavenly temple. And then we're going to find out what happens next as all the generations of Noah have one language. Are these people different post-flood than pre-flood? We will see. Are we going to enter the city of God? We will see. Whole earth had one language and the same words. And as people migrated from the east, they found a plain. This is super intentional wording here. Plain, not mountain. Mountain, plain. In the land of Shinar, and settled there. And they said to one another, "Come, let us make bricks and burn them thoroughly." And they had brick for stone and bitumen for mortar. And they said, "Come, let us build ourselves a city, and a tower with its top in the heavens. And let us make a name for ourselves, lest we be dispersed over the whole face of the earth." And the Lord came down to see the city and the tower which the children of man had built. And the Lord said, "Behold, they are one people, and they have one language, and this is only the beginning of what they will do. And nothing that they propose to do will now be impossible for them. Come, let us go down and confuse their language, so that they may not understand one another's speech." So the Lord dispersed them from over the face of the earth, and they left off building the city. Therefore its name was called Babylon, because there the Lord confused the language of all the earth. And from there the Lord dispersed them over the face of the earth. Okay. It's a fun little painting. Tower of Babel. What does this story mean in light of the narrative so far? So you've seen God's will in Genesis 1 and 2 and the slide of humanity. So when you contrast this to what was supposed to happen in creation, what are some parallels that you see?
They're basically trying to build a mountain.
Yep. Mountain of God? Nah. Mountain of man. How about also be fruitful and multiply and fill the earth? And they're like, we're not going anywhere. We don't want to be dispersed. We want to stay right here. Okay. You saw the word city also. And we're like, oh, the city of God. They're like, we'll make our own city. We saw God's name should be great. Now Cain is like, no, I'll have a city named after myself, right? And then you have Nimrod, or I forget the other reference. And then you have now this group saying, we'll make a name for ourselves. Oh, the men of the sons of Elohim and the daughters of man, and they were of the name. Right? Now you have Tower of Babel. We will make a name for ourselves. City, greatness, rebellion, east, All these things, all these themes keep coming up, right? So this is really interesting. The word Babel appears over 200 times in the Bible, and it's always translated Babylon, the ancient word Babel. It's always translated Babylon, except right here in Genesis. But it's the exact same Hebrew word. So for some interesting reason, translators are like, oh, it's Babel. But it's the same Hebrew word, and we call it Babylon everywhere else, and it's the city of Babylon. So it is more appropriate to call it the Tower of Babylon. This is the city of Babylon. This is the Tower of Babylon. And we will see the Babylon is traced all the way through Revelation, right? For Babylonians, the name Babylon literally meant the gate of God, while for Yahweh and his people, it's a pun on the word confusion. Right? So they're like, gate of God, and God's like, confusion. All right, so Cain and his descendants are sent further east. They were expelled from Eden, and they went to Nod. And then the flood comes, and the garden, the altar, Eden, disappeared from the earth. Mankind now has no physical area on the planet that God is designated to dwell for the first time. This is why the descendants of Noah wanted to build a tower to reach the heavens. So before, can we get on the other side of the gate? No. Can we get up to heaven through our own tower? They want to reach God and have access to his heavenly presence. Cosmic rebellion number 2. So I forgot to mention this. That gate liturgy that I read, where it said, who shall ascend his holy hill, he who's blameless and righteous. That is where the title of that book came from, Who Shall Ascend the Mountain of the Lord? Saying, who can get past this gate? Who shall ascend the mountain of the Lord? And so here we see this question. That question has been asked ever since the exile. Who can ascend the mountain of the Lord? And here, this story, the whole Bible is trying to answer that question. And right here, they're saying, we will. We'll build our own. Exactly what you said. We're going to build our own mountain, and we're going to ascend the mountain of God. Babylon is the symbol. I mean, it's a real city, but it's the symbol of humanity's attempt to govern ourselves without reference to and in defiance of God. Babylon is the antithesis of the city of God. City of God, God dwells with man. City of God, man spreads out over the face of the earth. City of God, God's name is made great. They don't spread out. They try to ascend into heaven, and they want their own city to have their own name be great. Permanence, power, immortality. Cain, again, when he built a city, he called the name of it after the name of his son, Enoch. And then in Israel, there's this little piece. It's a fun little scripture, Isaiah 14, 13, and 15, describing the king of Babylon. It says, in Isaiah says, you said in your heart, I will ascend to heaven, above the stars of God. I will sit on the mount of assembly in the far north. I will ascend above the heights of the clouds. I will make myself like the Most High. But you are brought down to Sheol, to the depth of the pit. So this is another example of like later on biblical authors looking back and explaining a little bit more of the story to us. And going like, that was in the king's heart. It's like, I'm ascending to heaven. I'm going to go up there. Just like Ezekiel is like, you were on the mountain of God. You did da-da-da-da. You're like, oh, Eden's the mountain. Okay, wow. Like, it's filling in more of the story for us. So Babylon is now on going to be viewed as the prototypical godless city through the rest of the Bible. It becomes Babylon the whore in Revelation. Babylon is a place of exile later on for the Israelites. Babylon thematically is set up as the city of man versus the city of God. So you have seed of man, seed of serpent during battle, and then you multiply that and you get city of God, city of man. You have God versus the Satan, the Satan, the accuser. There's just cosmic battle on an individual level, to a city level, to just all the way down the line. And heck, we still do it, don't we? The Burj Khalifa. Look at the skyscrapers next to this thing. They're massive. And then there's the Burj Khalifa. How tall can I build? And there's projects underway to build even taller towers. Now, us moderns, we're less spiritual. We are, if anything, we're materialists. We build a tower simply to show that we're the greatest among men, not trying to ascend into God's presence. You want to talk about Tower of Babel? We landed on the moon. Crazy. We had to beat we got to be the greatest. We're going to do it for, I think it was good for our country and all that. Who cares? The point is, we need more. We need higher. We need better. We need greater. So Genesis 1 and 2, it opens with a city of God where God dwells with his people. Genesis 11, Tower of Babel, is the end of the primeval period of history, and it bookends with the city of man. So you start with the city of God, and you trace this through this new creation and all these rebellions, and then you end. Eden is gone. There is no city of God. We are left with a city of man, with mankind trying to ascend into God's presence. Okay? Genesis 1 to 11, the story is a descent. We're going to talk about ascent through Scripture, but the narrative we read from Genesis 1 to 11, from Monday to now, has been a descent from the mountain of God down the depths of exile from Eden all the way to Babylon. Just like Jonah's picture right there. The sins of Adam and Eve, expelled. Cain, expelled farther. Lamech, increased Cain's sin. Angel marriages, cosmic rebellion. The flood, wiped everything out. The Tower of Babylon, and then the great dispersion. What does God do to fix this? It's like shooting a pool cue at the ball, and poof, they just go. He just scatters out, right? So you have this picture of just down, worse, blah, and you're just farther and farther away. There's no more mountain of God. Man is farther separated. God is life. He's represented as life. And so any movement away from God is movement towards death, yeah. Humanity is now fully depraved, exiled, and scattered. When will the seed of the woman come and reconcile the wicked, exiled nations? Wicked, exiled nations that are scattered back to the mountain of God. How do you clean? You drop a glass of water and it hits and it shatters and water goes everywhere and glass goes everywhere. How could you possibly reverse slow-mo, and it comes back together? We're seeing that humanity is worse and worse and worse and worse, violent, exiled, boom. And we need to figure out some way to get back to those three things that we lost: purity, life, and God's presence. How does that mess get back up to God's presence? I mean, the story, if you're just reading it like a novel and you don't know anything else, you're just like, this is getting more and more hopeless. And every person is continually evil all the time. That's the problem. This problem is getting worse and worse and worse. So Michael Morales, the biblical account of the primeval age develops a solid theology of sin, assessing human nature with a devastating pessimism. That way which has separated man farther and farther from God must therefore be countered by a new way that leads back to God, a way that overcomes sin. It enables humanity to draw near to him. The theology of sin thus becomes a backdrop for a theology of sacrifice, as the consuming flames of the altar shine into the all-engulfing darkness of human depravity. Finding fuller expression later in Leviticus, the way of Yahweh already begins to open as Noah's altar accomplishes what the deluge of waters, the flood, could not, quelling the wrath of God. Although the root of humanity's heart remains evil, the soothing aroma of the ascent offerings, the going up offerings, pacifies Yahweh's own heart, abating his curse and releasing his blessing. Pause there. Any questions about this drama? Any doubts about how this is coming together? Anything that's not making sense? Or is this feeling like, I see it, this is a unified story. This is about exile. It gets darker and darker and darker and darker and darker, and we need to find a way back. And I see how every story is just playing into this melody. We're looking at generations of humanity and going like, yeah, I totally see how it fits together. But if like Noah was your like sixth great grandpa and you're living in some random little chunk of land, like, do you know the drama that we're looking at right now? Do you have any idea of like what's going on? Is it fair? Is that kind of what you're after? Yeah. Or almost like, if we go, like, let's just go like pre-flood even, right? And go like, okay, there's been a lot of generations, and during Noah's time, God talks to Noah, and everybody else is just like killing and doing stuff. And you're like, did you know, like, did somebody like call you to repentance? Or like, is it fair? Like I get Noah, I get Cain and Abel, right? Because they're like at the gate. Like their parents were like, I got a kind of bad story to tell you kids. Wrecked it all for everybody, and they understand. And then I'm sure to some degree, we don't know, but there's probably a huge amount of oral tradition like that carries massively. But also, Paul, in Romans, is it 1 or 8? I forget. In Romans, where he says, all men are without excuse because we see the creation and we're basically like, no. And I'm like, oh, that's why it's fair. When I wrestle with like, is it fair that God wipes everybody out and they didn't like know, like we get a chance to hear about Jesus or whatever? And it's like they, especially in this primordial age where they had a very strong concept of gods or entities or the stars, and they're like, I'm going to pick something to worship. Like, I don't know if anybody was an atheist back then. I mean, I think you're like, I'm just going to pick something that feeds my appetite so I can secretly be God. And God is like, you can't possibly look at a single blade of grass, like John Calvin said, and not rejoice. You look at that grass and you're like, I'm God. You're like, whoa, wow, you are corrupt to your core. You have full denial of your creator as you take breath and have fingers and taste food and see the sun. And you're like, I bet that's God. It lets me kill my kids to get harvest. You're like, you just make everything up to be God. I'm going to make a tower and I'm going to take over whatever's up there. Like, so I think our accountability, even without spoken revelation, is completely justified by our absolute defiance of creation and whatever God created it. And I think on top of that, I think there's probably really strong, we weren't over like the whole world, especially pre-flood. So I do think there's strong oral tradition during that time too. Good, really good, yeah, great question. I've got a couple of screenshots of the book that he like maps it out to show like visually what's going on, right? So you're just like, okay, waters of chaos, which also represent death. And you see this pattern, you go, okay, well, out of that, we get an Eden, we get a mountain, and Adam is up here, right? And then fall, descent, and you get, in a plain, you get Cain's pathetic little city with murder, and it ends all in death and waters, and you get a new mountain, and you get Noah on top of that, on Ararat, and then that doesn't work, and down we go, and now we're in a plain, and we've got some false city, Tower of Babylon, and it's just going to keep, you're just going to keep seeing this pattern through all of Scripture. So Genesis 12, which is Abraham, to 1 Kings 8 presents its post-primordial era, and it presents the first cycle of history culminating in Israel's inheritance of rest and permanence given to them by God, not taken by man like Babylon. So while the tower builders like Cain and men of the name want to make a name for themselves, Solomon, in 1 King, builds a house for Yahweh's name. Instead of Babylon, from which all the nations are scattered, Zion is the place to which the nations shall stream. Okay. And it all starts with a guy named Abraham. So Abraham is contrasted like Babylon, Tower of Babylon ends, and immediately we meet this guy named Abraham. And those stories are completely tied together. They're not unique little random pictures. And they're juxtaposed for a reason. So it says, in you, the Lord says, in you, Abraham, all the families of the earth shall be blessed. Which is right after God just scattered all the nations of the earth. So how is God going to get everything back? Well, now he mysteriously picks one man, and he's like, I scattered everybody. But I'm going to gather them, or they're going to be blessed through you. Somehow, through you, we will undo this thing that just happened. And instead of Babylon making their own name great, God sets out to make Abraham's name great, because he knows Abraham's heart is to make his name great. Genesis 12, 7 and 8. Then the Lord appeared to Abram and said, to your offspring I will give this land. And there he built an altar to the Lord and called upon the name of the Lord. So let's talk about altars for a minute. So we saw an altar with Cain and Abel, right? You're like, okay, that's how do they know what that is and where that comes? This is way before Leviticus, way before the law. And then we get to Noah, and Noah is like, somehow he knew what to do. He knew what clean and unclean animals were, and he makes an altar, and his ascent offering, his burnt offering that goes up, appeased God, appeased his wrath. And so now we get to Abraham, and God saying, I will give your offspring this land. I will bless nations through you. And he builds an altar and calls on the name of the Lord. Okay. What does this image remind you of? Like, maybe squint at it a little bit, like those like 3D books where you're like, it's a dinosaur, no, it's a yo-yo, I'm not sure. You know, if you kind of squint, what does this image remind you of in the Bible? Altar. Yep. What else?
A tower or a mountain?
Mm-hmm. Mountain. Yep. Any mountain in particular?
Like mountain that Moses went up, or like the
Sinai.
Yeah.
Uh huh.
Or
What's it have in common with Sinai?
Fire.
Fire. Uh huh. Yeah. Yeah. All right. Check this out. I'm excited. All right. Scholars believe altars, because you don't get like a glossary at the back of the Bible, right? So you're putting things together from verses all over the place and putting it. So they believe altars likely symbolized a miniature version of the mountain of God. And isn't that what the whole Bible is about right now? Like, the whole Bible up till now is about the mountain of God. We lost it. We need to ascend. We can't. So we make false mountains of God. And now you've got Noah making one. You have Abram making one. Okay? Most of the time, altars are built to mark a theophany. That means encounter with God. You encounter God. Where did you encounter God initially? Top of God's mountain. You encounter God, you make an altar. They become tokens of the presence of God. Okay? They become tokens of the presence of God. In Exodus 24:4, Moses builds an altar at the foot of Mount Sinai, just covered in fire, with 12 pillars representing the 12 tribes surrounding Sinai, and the consuming fire and smoke of the altar parallels the description of God's presence atop Sinai. So in this case, there's this giant mountain with fire consuming it. and the 12 tribes of Israel all around it. And then in miniature, Moses makes 12 pillars and a little mountain of rock and lights the top on fire. Like, whoa, okay. This is, okay. Then Ezekiel describes an altar in his, I think he's got a vision of a temple to come. He has a vision of an altar in Ezekiel 45:15, and it includes the phrase Har El in Hebrew, which, especially given the shape itself, probably means mountain of God. Har El, Elohim. Har is mountain, so mountain of God. So as a mountain of God, the altar would essentially signify the presence of God, along with a means of approaching his presence. So when you'll see this in Leviticus, you've got this altar, this miniature mountain of God. God is consuming fire. Hebrews, our God is a consuming fire. Sinai, consuming fire. Busting out through the Exodus from Egypt, pillar of fire. Burning bush, fire. Some theologians are like, oh, wait a second. Ezekiel says that in Eden there were stones of fire. What? Was the tree of life on fire? Like the burning bush? Was God's presence fire? Like, was he some sort of consumed in fire and not like, I don't know, but holy cow, there's a theme of God being a consuming fire. And we're going to talk tomorrow about the danger of that consuming fire that is God. So now you look at altars and you say, okay, if God's presence dwells on Sinai in consuming fire, and you build altars often when you encounter the presence of God, I get how it represents the mountain of God where God dwells and an approach to his presence, because I can't approach anymore. I can't approach. And when he approaches me, I freak out. And I build a little altar, and then I put in a going up offering, because where is God? He is on his heavenly mountain, on the heavenly temple. And the aroma, this pure animal will be consumed and transformed into smoke, which rises up as a pleasing aroma to God. So this little mountain of God represents God's presence and the way we approach God's presence with a sacrifice on it. All right. Which direction does Abraham go? West. Woohoo! Yeah, I know. Ooh, a little glimmer of hope, right? Abraham's initial movement is westward from Ur, because he's from the land of Ur. A return in the direction of Eden. Now, Eden is no more, but we're still using these symbolic directions, right? So Abraham's initial movement is westward after everybody so far has been east, 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 east. Abram's altar and tent are located on a mountain, with Bethel, meaning house of God, on the west, and the city of Ai, the city of Ai, which means a ruin or a heap of rubble, on the east. So on the west, you have a city called Bethel, which means house of God. On the west is Bethel, house of God. And on the east is the city of Ai, which means ruin and a heap of rubble. And you're like, oh, yep, okay. House of God, city of rubble, right? Okay, anybody want to guess any other eastward cities? Coming up soon, right around the corner. Sodom and Gomorrah, to the east. Cain builds to the east. Babylon is east of Noah's Ark. Lot chooses cities east of Abraham's altar. These little hints. Abraham, or Lot, which way you want to go? East. Of course. Okay. All right. The common parallel contrast, the sanctuary image of God's mountain versus the eastward departure towards a false garden and a city bound for destruction. False mountain, false garden, bound for destruction, west, back to God's sanctuary. Abraham is called with, remember how creation, 10 speeches, Noah's Ark, 10 speeches, okay? Abraham is called with a fivefold blessing, which overcomes the 5 curses distributed in Genesis 3, or Genesis 3 through 11. There is no more walking with God anymore after the flood. Adam walked with God, Enoch walked with God, Noah walked with God, but now God says, walk before me. But we see this man who gets these five promises of blessing to counteract these 5 curses. We see him being talked to by God. We see him making an altar and being near the house, Bethel meaning house of God. And we see him being told, hey, through you, the nations that I just scattered, they're all going to be blessed. All these people, these flood, pre-flood to post-flood sinful people that I have grief over and I had to scatter because now they're trying to take over heaven, all those people, they're going to be offered blessing. What a gracious gift. Through you, Abraham. Is Abraham the seed? So Abraham's sinful, but he has faith. He believed God, like Noah. And that is where Adam failed in the plan. Adam did not believe God, right? So could Abraham be the seed? When we talk about chiasms, all right, let's check out. We're going to finish Genesis. This is Genesis 1 through 11 as Abraham now starts to take over. Let's take a look at the structure of this unified story with all these pieces together. Actually, I'm just going to give you a minute or two because you have to really absorb it. Check out the summary categories, read through these and map them and just feel the genius brilliance of this section of this introduction to the Bible. I'll give you a couple minutes. So you'll want to go through the whole order, but then you'll also want to compare all the A's, compare the B's, compare the C's. Anybody have a new appreciation for how incredibly knit together the Bible is?
Yeah.
Even the words, I didn't explain this really, but Noach is basically the same word as rest. And now we're supposed to get, he's this image of resting on top of this mountain and the Sabbath rest. All the words, all the number 7, the play, the fulfillment, the narrative, everything is just fit together so well. The 3 tiers of creation, the 3 tiers of the ark, all the cosmic rebellions. It's crazy. All right, another quote from our friend Michael Morales. From Eden to the waters of the deluge, the flood, from Eden to Babylon, to the Babylonian exile, from Eden to the grave of Egypt, Joseph at the end of Genesis. The trajectory of the book of Genesis is from the fullness of life to death, and that in relation to the alienation from the presence of God. The book of Exodus narrates how Israel is reborn out of this grave and ushered into the divine presence, reversing the movement of Genesis. Tomorrow, we'll talk about Jacob and the Exodus.